Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by Ray Finkel. Laces out, Dan. Let's dim the lights and kick off the show.
Welcome, everybody, to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by The Supery. Dry goods for the sophisticated adventurer at The Supery. Welcome, everyone, to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I am Todd.
And we're filmmakers. I do a lot of writing, screenwriting, especially lately, a lot of short films and feeling like I'm in a good rhythm for a new feature that I'm working on and all the other things. But that's enough about that. We use it all to do the show. Todd, what are we doing today?
Right into it. Today we are covering Oppenheimer. Just came out. If you haven't seen this, please pause this episode. If you know history, we won't ruin anything, but right. We are going to ruin some stuff. We're going to talk about some stuff. So we don't want to ruin it. So please go pause the episode, go watch some film, and then come back and take a listen.
Yeah. We'll look at a bunch of things. I'm surprised, I think, how wide this conversation is. You're not surprised just because you're smarter than me, but we'll at a minimum, look at cinematography, color, black and white, fission versus fusion, some IMAX considerations from my perspective, as well as look at some of the story and writing, fast starts, the Trinity buildup, the final scene, and as well as some of the music and casting, what goes into that, how it impacts the viewing of the film, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
And a quick synopsis of this 3+ hour film. It's a good one. The story of American scientist J. Robert Oppenheimer and his role in the development of the atomic bomb. It's directed by Christopher Nolan, screenplay by Christopher Nolan. It's based on the book by Kai Bird and Martin Sherwin. Cinematography by Hoyte van Hoytema. It's featuring Cillian Murphy as J. Robert Oppenheimer, Emily Blunt as Kitty Oppenheimer, Robert Downey Jr. as Strauss, Alden Ehrenreich as Senate Aide, Kenneth Branagh as Niels Bohr, Florence Pugh as Jean Tatlock, Jefferson Hall as Chevalier, Matt Damon as General Groves, Benny Safdie as Edward Teller, and Gary Oldman as Harry Truman. And
for the first of 2 weeks in a row, no clip because it's all very moody and just explosions in here and like good voiceover stuff. So, Todd, this is, by my estimation anyway, the third in a series of Nolan's apocalyptic films, right? Interstellar, Tenet, and now this, the bomb that goes off. I'm curious, how did you sit through this 3-hour film? What impact did it have on you? Did you enjoy it? What do you got, man?
It's breathtaking. The whole thing is amazing. I mean, I've said this before on the podcast. I don't want to stop complaining about a 3-hour movie. Just stop complaining about it. There are plenty of 3-hour movies that are considered masterpieces. I mean, Godfather, just don't look at the length and go watch it for what it is and then make a decision of whether or not it's too long for you. That's all it is. Stop complaining. It's like, that's the whole conversation around this film, is that it's 3 hours long. It's 3 hours long. And it drives me crazy. Just go watch it. Okay. So with that out of the way, it didn't, to me, feel like 3 hours. I could have sat for another 3 hours just to watch the performance and the way that this thing was shot. And okay, so the performances, the way that it was shot, and the music just completely envelop you into the not just the life of Oppenheimer, but the situation that was going on. It would be one thing just to tell a biopic of Oppenheimer, but that's not what this really is. Like, yes, it's a biopic, but at the same time, it is a story of a situation that is one of the most important situations in human history, and doesn't give you everything to know whether or not you should like Oppenheimer. That's the other thing. Like, I felt like several times that, oh, he's a bad guy, in this film. And then, what were you going to say something? No. Okay. And then there were and then the next thing that would happen, I'd think, oh no, like he has to do this. And this is important. And then it would happen. Like the bomb went off and he stands in front of everyone. Or after they drop it on Hiroshima, and he says that it's a win for the United States or whatever. And I'm thinking, what is he doing? Like he's conflicted and yet he's going along with this. Why is he doing that? Which bodes bad for him later on, when he's sitting in front of the hearing. But anyway, the music, this is a perfect example of why Nolan is genius. He knows better than most. Maybe he doesn't know better than most, but he does it better than most of utilizing music as an anchor for his story, not something to push it forward or to heighten a moment or whatever. It is literally the anchor. You change one thing about the music and it changes everything about the film. I mean, as a musician, I just adore that. I think that's so important in every film that I love. It's largely because of the music. And I mean, if you look at Interstellar, my favorite film, obviously it's, the music is, I mean, a good half of why I love that film,
Right.
if not more. And he understands that and uses it throughout the entire film as that anchor. The sound, I mean, I saw it in IMAX on purpose. I drove 45 minutes to stand in line for an hour. And yeah, it was not the best viewing experience just because of everything that had to go into it.
Yeah.
Yet it was the only way I could see this film. The sound, whoever mixes films like this is a downright amazing genius. I don't know how they get sounds so low, so loud, because one of the things that is, I mean, that's just so difficult to get a low sound, which has a long wavelength, to be very loud and not distort your speakers. So obviously it's the array they're using, it's the setup and everything in the theater. I get that. But in order to mix that, you have to have that, like that physical thing. So unbelievable. I thought Cillian Murphy's performance was otherworldly. I mean, there's no, if he doesn't at least be nominated for an Oscar, then I will shun the Oscars
Right.
forever.
Yeah.
Right.
If not outright win it, right?
Right. And then also I just adore the casting, pulling in Robert Downey Jr., which everybody, I guarantee, just sees Iron Man when they see Robert Downey Jr. They just, right? But he's so brilliant and such an amazing actor that he can overcome that no matter what. And have this performance that is just mind-boggling. I would say that Cillian Murphy and Robert Downey Jr. should both win an Oscar for this.
Yeah. Robert Downey will get the best supporting.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Easily. It's a 1-2 punch, man. God. It's
gotta be. Cinematography, editing is fantastic. I mean, these moments of him thinking, like the way that, they'll show him thinking about quantum mechanics. And then we see these like loops and hear these sounds of like flutters that are supposed to make us think about electrons and the atomic world. And they do. And it's beautiful. And they have these moments when he talks about outer space or like a black hole. And we see this flash of like what a black hole would look like. We talk a lot about in this podcast of not dumbing down for the audience. I think something like that, even if you understand what they're talking about, which I think that, I mean, to the extent that we do, you and I, we understand the idea of a particle being a wave and a particle. And we understand what a black hole is. We understand what the effects of it. We kind of understand that just because we talk about it a lot and we love that kind of stuff. But still, to get that to have those moments of, I'm going to see that thing that they're talking about, or they're going to explain this one moment because they're explaining it to somebody else, this one idea because they're going to explain it to somebody else in the film. Like, it doesn't feel too much like exposition in this film. It feels like it's going along with the necessity of the conversation in the film, but also it is to keep people who don't talk about this kind of stuff in their everyday lives involved in the story, because you can watch the story and there's a lot happening. There's a lot of conversations happening. They're dropping names about this guy and that guy and whatever. And it's hard to follow. In fact, I think I need to watch it a second and third time to really, okay, I'm glad I'm not the only one. You're nodding your head, yes. To really make sure that I follow everything in that regard. But I could, meaning if I watch it a second time, I could be like, oh yeah, that's the guy he's talking about. Or, oh yeah, now they're over here. Okay, that makes sense. I'm glad I watched it a second time. But if I don't know anything about particle physics and I watch a second, third, or fourth time, I will never get that unless it is at least somewhat explained in the highest possible, format. So that's
which was good enough for the first viewing. Like I think everyone probably got lost with the names. I did. But you didn't get lost with the physics, which is freaking wild.
Right. But that's important because unless you get it, unless it's explained to you a little bit, the physics, you'll never get it on second, third, or fourth viewing because you're not going to go research that probably. No. At least if you haven't researched it before or don't care about it, you won't now. Yeah. So that's the kind of stuff that has to be somewhat handed to you. And I did not feel like talked down to at all. Okay. I'm glad you didn't either. Anyway, so I'm just going to shut up now because I really want to hear what you think. Because to me, the performances are incredible. The cinematography is exactly what I wanted for a movie like this. I felt like I was inside Oppenheimer's mind half the time. Just Cillian Murphy standing there thinking is like, I mean, I don't know how to explain it. It's perfect. It's absolutely perfect. The conversation he has with Einstein that we don't hear until the very end, but we do get to hear it. That was one of those things I was like, please, I want to know what he said. I want to know what he said. And then we get to hear it, right? It's just great at the very end. It's great storytelling the whole time. And I found some old footage of a description of the Trinity project on YouTube, and I'll share it with you. We can put it in the show notes.
Please.
And it's literally the movie. Like this guy from like the 1950s is talking about like the Trinity project and describes it. And we're seeing some footage of this and that, whatever. It's literally the movie. Everybody laying down with their backs to the explosion. And the only time they could see is after the first flash and they had to cover their eyes and like the rainstorm delaying the explosion for a few hours. Like all of that is real. That like really happened. Just unbelievable. I also loved, lastly, and then I'll let you talk. I also loved that the explosion was not the end of the movie. The explosion was only a piece of the story, right? And so we're watching this movie, waiting for the moment that it explodes, and I could hear a pin drop in an IMAX theater. It was right. Okay, It was like everyone was holding their breath, including me, and I was front and center right there, just like, eyes wide, waiting for this thing to happen. And it was brilliant to have no sound for so long. And then this just loud bang. But that wasn't the loudest moment of the movie for me. The loudest moment of the movie for me was afterwards when he's walking in to this theater of these people, right? And he's about to speak to them, and they're just stomping on the bleachers. I mean, I felt my bones rattling, and I think that's the story. The story is not the explosion. The story is how he dealt with building the thing, and then after it happened, and after he basically felt like he destroyed the world, him dealing with the sound of everyone on top of him, and I got that. I mean, I was looking around thinking, is anybody else like blown away by how freaking loud this is and how intense this is? It was way more intense than the explosion. The explosion was like a boom, and then it subsided relatively quickly. this was just wouldn't stop. It was just it was just nonstop and told the entire film in that moment for me. So anyway, sorry, go ahead.
Dude, yeah. I mean, you just dropped 1,000 things on my face.
Sorry.
And so, yeah, I think the performances, my God, I could not agree more. Cillian Murphy completely disappears. And you really just see Oppenheimer, and doubly so for Robert Downey Jr. as Strauss. It's pronounced Strauss. It's the Southern way.
Yeah. Did I pronounce it wrong or right? I was
I'm just commenting on.
I know it's not Strauss, which is how it's kind of spelled.
Yeah.
We normally say it.
Right. But Strauss. I love that little clarification at the beginning whenever they're meeting each other. Strauss? Strauss. It's the Southern pronunciation. But he really does. I mean, I see the makeup. Sure, that helps. The wardrobe and costuming. Sure, that helps. But it's his performance. Like, you could have had him dressed up as Iron Man for all I care, and I still would have seen Strauss, just because he's doing things with his face and with his mannerisms that are very not Robert Downey Jr. They're very whoever this guy is. And it was just astounding to watch him. I mean, everyone in here is really fantastic. I think there was only one actor that popped up. I don't know who he is. And I was like, oh, you need to bring it back a few notches here, buddy. He was just doing way too much like face acting. And it was weird. Like, maybe that was a really good lifelike imitation of whatever he was doing. But as a film, it's distracting.
When was this?
This was, I don't remember this guy. He just pops up, I think, twice in the film. And he like is making this face. I think the first time is during the recruitment phase. And he meets him and he's making this weird face. Then again later on. But otherwise, I was just in love with everyone. We'll come back to, the casting stuff. Yeah, I watched it twice. First time in IMAX, proper IMAX format. I think there's this whole, thing going around about what's true IMAX and what isn't. IMAX, I think, is mostly about the resolution and the aspect ratio. It's not about whether it's film or laser. That has nothing to do with a proper IMAX viewing. And so there are 40, 50, I don't know, a lot. There's a fair amount of IMAX films, theaters, if you want to go see it in the right IMAX format. But I saw it twice, first in IMAX, then in 35, and fairly different experiences. I think maybe the IMAX was too intense. I walked out, my head was rattled for the rest of the day. And I mean, it was intense, maybe too intense. I don't know. But I think watching it the second time helped clarify a few things, because it's moving along at such a clip. If you blank for more than 2 or 3 seconds, you'll probably miss something. And I think I blanked at one point where I just wasn't 100% engaged with a sentence. And it was like a very important sentence. and because the next moment was Oppenheimer saying, that would be treason. And I was like, crap. What would be treason?
Oh, yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Right. And I was like, because there's all this buildup about the Chevalier incident, and then that was that moment, and I didn't really understand what the offense was, and so my second viewing, I was just tuned in. I wasn't anticipating it at all. I just happened to be a little more tuned in that moment. And he said it, and I was like, oh, that was that thing I missed. And it just suddenly became obvious. And the second time through, the names clicked a little bit better. And names get thrown out so quickly and frequently that you don't know what name is important and which one you should know. Like there's a comment from General Groves early on about Tolson. And I was like, oh, am I supposed to know who Tolson is? I don't think we ever meet Tolson. It's just a random guy he's talking about. And I was like, which one was Tolson? And it just stuck in. I shouldn't even know the name Tolson, but here I am still like 3 days later. And so watching it the second time definitely helped so much as far as clarity goes. But there were just certain things too that I thought the emotion and a lot of sequences carried a lot stronger in 35, just because the format's different. Like, I think the emotion in the final shot is stronger in 35, just because you're cropped in closer to his eyes, as opposed to the taller format. It's a more beautiful image. The hat, and chest, and you get much more. And even as you're pushing in, it's still much more interesting visually to look at. But I think you're just dialed in a lot more through restricting all that visual information to just his facial features. And you kind of feel a little bit more in tune with whatever he's feeling. And that's an important shot, of course, because it goes to everything you're saying about, we don't know how to judge Oppenheimer. And in a lot of ways, he doesn't know how to judge himself. And that's the big wrestling match that's going on in this film in, several ways. And I walked out of after that first viewing, not sure, how do I feel about this movie? I don't know. I don't think liking or disliking it is the right way to feel about it. Even though that's kind of how we boil everything down. But seeing it the second time and feeling a little more clear, even though that's back to back Friday and Saturday 3-hour viewings of the same movie. It's a lot, but I walked out and I was like, oh man, I feel differently. And then last night it sticks with you. It just hangs in the air. Those trumpets, just slowly building and releasing, or they just stick with you. And the more it resonated and just hung out over my head, the more I began to love it. And I think that's probably where I end with this film is I love it. It's very strong. It has a lot to think about, assuming you're a thoughtful person. I think that's the one thing I didn't like about it was, on the one hand, it's absolutely from the perspective of Oppenheimer, like 90% of it. The stuff that isn't from his perspective, right, is kind of the wheelings and dealings of Strauss as he's trying to figure out if he's going to get this cabinet appointment. And I get that. It's supposed to be from his perspective, his vantage, and we're getting inside his head. I understand that. I think there's, walking into this movie, I'll say, I was hoping for a stronger commentary or opinion or visceral implication about the bombs themselves going off in Japan. I was expecting to spend a little time over in Japan, either briefly getting to know some people that get wiped out, and then you start to feel the emotional weight of what we actually did in World War II, or having a moment where, fine, we saw what the bomb did in the middle of nowhere in the desert. That's great. Like, that was powerful, and we'll come back to that. But it's nothing, because if you compare that to it going off in a city with, innocent, men, women, and children, how do you even compare those two? You don't compare those two at all. Yeah. And the only way you can really see that is to see that. Instead, we saw the bombs going off via the radio in the hallways of Los Alamos, which is, I understand the importance again of seeing how scientists are reacting to their work being used in destructive ways. But I just think if you want people to really walk out of here with an appreciation for that kind of force, you really need to let us see it. And I get, he was showing it to us psychologically through Oppenheimer stepping in the decomposed corpse, or not decomposed, but, irradiated, detonated, burned, charred corpse, as well as like seeing skin fly off, the front row woman at the speech that he gives. Like that's all good. I wanted a stronger judgment, if I'm completely honest.
I can see that for sure. That's really interesting. I never thought about that. Yeah.
But that aside, and the reason I want that is because I think there's a lot of people who have no ambiguity over what we did in World War II. And if you have such strong moral clarity of what we did, I don't think you need to be in charge of making those kinds of decisions.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't be super clear cut. It should be not just, well, we did what we had to do. That's not enough. It's not enough to destroy whatever 50 to 100,000 lives, you know.
More, almost 200 when it was all said and done.
You need more than, you know, a little guilt. You need to really feel the weight of what you're doing. And of course we feel that through Oppenheimer a little bit. And I appreciated that early on. He was trying to think about it in very reasonable, rational, scientific terms, that if we just demonstrate the power to them that we have, they'll back down. And, you know, he immediately gets overridden by Groves. Like, nope, they need to see this demonstrated, all right, in their cities. They need to feel the loss. And that's the only way. And then we'll do it again. The second one's to ensure them that we can keep doing this as long as it takes for them to back down. And then from there, Oppenheimer suddenly, what do? You've already built the thing, or you're on the cusp of it at that point in the film. And yeah, there's a lot. And so that's kind of,
I mean, because at that point, Hitler was dead.
Yeah.
You know, the whole point of him building it was so that the Nazis wouldn't have a bomb. Well, Hitler's dead, and that part of the war is pretty much over. So you had that was interesting, because then you had these people, you know, meeting about like, okay, well, that the war is over, or the war with Germany is over, so we should stop this or whatever. But he persisted, basically saying somebody's going to develop this. It needs to be us.
Mm-hmm.
But why does it need to be us? Are we the policemen of the world? Or who's going to, why is the world going to trust us with this over anybody else? And so when I saw that, I realized, oh, this is not just a story of this guy who had to build this thing so that, you know, we could win the war. He was on a mission to get this done. And so our war with Japan, like the the issue with Japan, like that was not something that was discussed at all at the beginning of the film. Japan had nothing to do with anything. It was all Germany and Nazis and everything. And then when that was over, it's like, oh, why did we continue going? Oh, he pushed it forward. Okay. I mean, everybody did, you know, like the government did, but he supported that, pushing it forward and continuing the research, continuing the development. And there were several times where he could have stopped and he just didn't, you know? So I was like, at the end of it, I thought, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? I don't know. And that's why they end with that shot of him just sitting there thinking, am I a good guy or a bad guy? Like, I don't know, you know, but there's several points in the film where, you know, Kitty would, you know, she was so strong. She was just telling him, fight for yourself or whatever. And he just couldn't, because I think that he just hated himself in ways where it would feel bad if he fought for himself. But at the same time, he knew he had to live with himself. So it was just this massive war. It was told in such a good way, but that's a great point about not seeing over in Japan, not being there, not getting that feeling of when even if it was just like a few seconds or just a minute, you know, it would have been very impactful.
It wouldn't take much, you know, just to have someone, you know, a mom and a dad at a grocery market buying something and then nothing. Right. Well, look, I'll run through some notes and then jump in. I feel like this is going to be more conversational than anything else. But as far as cinematography goes, I love the use of color versus black and white, because my first time through, I was like, oh, this is clearly, you know, the future is in black and white and the past is in color. And that's not so simple. I think Oppenheimer is in full color and Strauss is in black and white, colorless, stark, just the same as his McCarthyist views, right? It's just this world where everything is so clear cut and lacks any kind of grades of in between. And it's also painting this picture of fission versus fusion, because that's how he labels it at the start of the film. Fission is color, fusion is black and white. And that's also kind of the start of like TV and broadcasting, and it carries us into the Cold War. And I think those two things are very interesting. My perspective of that is fission, technically speaking, let's define them both. Fission is the splitting of a nucleus into two, and fusion is combining two nuclei. And of course, fusion, far more powerful, right? And they touch on that in the film. Now, if you're going to look at it metaphorically, I would say fission is Germany versus America, right? You have two would-be, atomic superpowers fighting for supremacy. And then, of course, Germany does not succeed. America does. They become the one superpower, right? That's our fission. And then fusion is America being the atomic superpower, now being combined with Russia. That's our fusion. And of course, combining Russia and America, atomic weaponry becomes far more dangerous, far more potent than one of those alone. And we'll kind of come back to that later. Cinematography wise, watching it in IMAX, I was like, there's a lot of considerations you should be making. I'm not saying they did, but if I'm thinking about the way I'm going to shoot an IMAX film, one of the first things I'm thinking about is motion sickness. Like putting something on screen like that, you have to be very delicate with how you handle handheld, even your pacing, your camera moves, because you can get your audience motion sick just from sitting in front of that. And so I don't know how much they had to think about that, because Nolan's style isn't very handheld anyway. But I did notice handheld shots were few and far between. There's like maybe 2 or 3, it felt like, where they were really going for it on handheld. Otherwise, it's cranes, it's dollies, it's on sticks. We're just not going to whip this thing around, which is important too, because, this is a story where we're in and out of scenes very, very quickly. And so you want to make sure people get oriented very, very fast and seamlessly so that they're engaged with the story and not just trying to figure out when and where the hell are we, which is another nice thing. There's no timestamps in this film. They never tell you when you are. You have to contextually piece it together for yourself. And you start at the end, right? That conversation with Einstein and Oppenheimer is after the building of the bomb, and as he's about to start a whole new department. And you have to realize and start to piece together based on what's happening within the world, because it's not really until they announce Germany's invaded Poland that you're like, oh, I know exactly when we are now, and I know what to anticipate. Crap, here we go. Then it becomes very, very clear and obvious. Other things for IMAX, of course, is the way you frame it for cropping later on. You're not just shooting for IMAX, right? This is going to live in multiple formats, all the way down to some asshole's cell phone. Don't watch this on your cell phone. And so, yeah. But you're aware of your cropping, and so you want to get a good shot for IMAX as well as for later consideration in 35. And I wouldn't be surprised if sometimes he was shooting both. Like, oh, okay, we're going to shoot this, in IMAX. Maybe let's, get a different shot strictly for 35 or something. That wouldn't surprise me too much. But the other thing with IMAX is, and with this film in particular, a lot of soft focus, which, I actually liked. For one, as a filmmaker who is more interested in emotional quality of a take as opposed to necessarily the technical quality, I felt like Nolan was constantly going towards performance in this film, which hasn't always been the case. I think there's been a lot of films where he was more interested in getting technical, perfection. In this film, it felt like he was much more interested in getting the performance and the emotional qualities across. And if that meant, we got to go with a shot that's a little softer, that's fine. You know what? We're going to tell the story better because this is an emotional story at its heart. As much as it's looking like a technical film about science, it's really, like Todd has been saying, like it's Oppenheimer's wrestling match that has going on in his head. And the best way to tell that is by communicating emotions. And that's how I think a lot of the soft focus is used. It's very intimate. It's alive as you feel us searching for clarity, for focus, right? It's all kind of playing hand in hand with the cinematography, which is beautiful. Of course, the other thing is shooting on IMAX in this larger than life format. Probably harder to pull focus because the depth of field is so much shallower when you start to open up the lens. That's just the nature of the larger the format, the narrower the depth of field gets as you get, wider apertures. Yeah. So a lot going on with cinematography. Story and writing wise, very fast start. I thought that was really important, right? The cutting is very quick. Visual effects popping within the first, 2-3 minutes. You're just in it. A lot happening. And I think that's important because you need to create a lot of momentum and visual interest in order to grab everyone's attention quickly. If they're going to be here for 3 hours, you want to make sure you don't wait 2 hours to get their attention. There are some films that work really well that way, and that's fine. Not this film. This film, you need to be completely engaged or else you're going to check out. If you skip that first 5 minutes, you're done. This is a slog. But if he can get you in the first 30 seconds, now he's got you and you can understand and follow the story much easier. It's just a difference between kind of the slow burn, right? Works for some things, but it's better for this, to pull everyone in immediately. A slow burn will be a fast death in this kind of movie. Exposition, I don't have much. There's just one little simple thing that I was like, that's smart. I don't know if they did this at Los Alamos or not, but it's a good thing to do for the film, which is the use of the fish bowls, right? And marbles. Great exposition. It's very simple. It's a quick visual reference for how close we are to seeing the bomb. And so every time we cut to that stuff, we're like, okay, we got time. We can take a breath. It's not time yet. But slowly those things start filling up and you're realizing, oh man, that they're getting there. And then of course, once those last few marbles hit, you're like, okay, when? And then like the tension starts to build and you start to just anticipate, when is it happening? When? And then they start building the scaffolding, right, for the bomb. And you're just like, oh God. And everything around that is just pins and needles. Because we know the outcome, we don't know the process. And so there's so much tension that you can utilize in that. And so the buildup of the actual Trinity test is really cool because it's just laden with suspense, right? It's almost 2 hours, 10 minutes ish before we finally see the bomb go off. And it's just this heart pounding setup because the uncertainty has been made so clear, articulated in so many scenes. Of course, we, the audience, know the world doesn't end. What we don't know is if anyone actually gets hurt in the process. We've started to respect and love these scientists, but as a general rule of thumb, we all kind of like scientists. Like even the weirdest of us don't really have anything against a scientist per se. It just might be some particular debate or another. Health food, we got it all wrong, whatever. Like you have your qualms, but as a whole, we have a great deal of respect in America for science and the people who carry it out. And so the idea that these guys are about to get, melted is like, I don't want that. And so we start to see, the sunblock get applied, eyeglasses, instructions to only look through the welder's glass. And then, at the last second, the scientist runs out to see it for himself. We have no idea if someone's going to get blinded, if they're going to get burned, if they're going to get cancer, or even just flat out melted. Like we don't know what's about to happen. And every little risk that someone is taking, we're like, what's going to happen to them? This guy's not putting on anything. He's just looking through the windshield. And that little comment from Teller is like, what's going to stop the glass? You're like, oh God, I don't know what's about to happen. And so we just feel the danger. Even as we know the general outcome, there's just so much anxiety that's being built up through the human element, just because we don't know if someone's everyone's in danger. Yeah, it's just a beautiful execution because the only thing we really know from atomic testing is that little house getting shredded. Like everything else is just mushroom clouds in the distance. Yeah. And so the final scene, let's talk about that whole conversation with Einstein, because there's this really great setup where they're doing that. I don't know what to call it. Little mock trial, the little hidden agenda room with Rob and whatever, Roger Rob. They have that line, that question. It was either there or at the trial. I forget which one, where they ask him, when did you first have doubts about the use of the H-bomb? And his response is something along the lines of, when it became clear we'd tend to use any weapon we built. That's saying a lot. And I think that's critical to understanding what's going on in his head at the very end, because we have that little exchange between Einstein and Oppenheimer, right? And as Einstein's turning to walk away, he throws out the memory, right? Do you recall when I came to you with those calculations that said we could start a chain reaction that could end the entire world? Einstein's like, yeah. He's like, I'm afraid we did. And then we hold, right? Oppenheimer's eyes are closed and we're watching missiles launching, armed with atomic weapons, explosions, the world chain reacting into fiery hell. This is all a callback to the start of the film, the things that Oppenheimer was imagining as a young student that came to pass, right? Visions of physics and how the world truly operates underneath it all. And now with his eyes closed, he's wrestling with his imagination once more, right? The same imagination that he and other scientists, as they said in the film, can see in their head. We can imagine. We don't need it demonstrated to understand the grave reality, right? But now he's got these fears that same imagination is not enough to prevent world powers from using the weapons that we've built for them. Because he knows military governments, they just want to use the things that get built. That's just how they operate. Why use the hammer if you're not going to use it? I feel like we've seen that mentality time and time again, publicly spoken by government officials, whether it's military or, congressional. That's just their mentality. Like, we build things, therefore we need to use them to demonstrate our great power or whatever. And so he's closing his eyes, imagining this nightmare scenario, because throughout the film, we've seen chain reactions. Of course, we've seen the technical ones, right? Of the bombs and blah, blah, blah. But there's so many other chain reactions we actually watched that you don't really consider to be chain reactions, right? Whenever he started his program, when he came back to America to teach quantum physics, he had a pupil. That pupil quickly, in one edit, grew to multiple, and then many, right? It just slowly chain reacted into a lot of students and a lot of interest, right? One scientist, as they began the Manhattan Project, Oppie, right? He grew into many. That was a chain reaction. It was just one small thing that grew into a bunch, right? And then you have the stomping, right, in the room after the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? That stomping feels like millions of little reactions. That's the intention there, of course. And so his one little test bomb that he started grew into a chain reaction that created thousands between America and Russia. And now he's just imagining, how does this play out? Because we're living in a fusion world now. And the result, the chain reaction of that, if it begins, is done. It's over. Yeah. And so that's ultimately what he's thinking about. That's what the film is trying to build into your head. That if you start this, there will be no end, or at least not one that you get to see. Yeah. And so that's I think the story that's being told through, throughout the entire film. Let's talk about some of the music and the casting. You said it perfectly well. And so I will just double down. Music carries us through the entire film, right? It's sweeping us through montages and various sequences. It gives us a sense of breathless pace to keep us engaged and feeling every moment is significant, right? Everything that's happening. And it's important because, like you said, if you strip this thing away, that's a rough one to get through. But with it, it's carrying us, and it makes it feel a lot lighter than it actually is. And it's just important to keep the audience tuned in and engaged. But it also is doing something else because it's present all the time. Therefore, stripping the music actually adds emphasis, right? It's normally the opposite. Adding music is emphasis. Right now, stripping it is emphasis in this film, right? Jean Tatlock, that whole little affair, whenever he's having to talk about her in that backroom interrogation, we should call it, they strip it out. Suddenly the music cuts out and it's just a conversation of them naked in a hotel room, opposite sides of the room. And it's perfect because we need to feel the weight of their exchange, of their relationship, because it's a very important moment, as that moment is implied in countless future moments. That conversation is the impetus for her death. What we don't know is if it's suicide or murder. Either way, it haunts Oppenheimer because he's the catalyst. Similar, they strip all the music away during the detonation of the Trinity bomb itself. In fact, all we hear is just breathing. It's the human element. That's all that's left. As we're watching, the first strike of just incredible power, we're just hearing breathing, and it's just unbelievable. Like, what a brilliant use of audio. And of course, afterwards, after the bombings in Japan, we hear Oppenheimer's speech, and then he just cuts all audio, and almost all audio, I should say. Like, we begin to feel his internal conflict, even as it contradicts the things that he's saying, right? He's trying to put a public face on his hopes effectively, and he's being a little audacious, right? Japan's not going to remember it. He's playing into the fever dream of war that happens, right? Anyone who lived through 9/11 remembers just how bombastic every politician became, and just how, fervent everyone was, bloodlust, it was chaos. It's pretty, sad to think about it in hindsight, even if understandable. You're just seeing, how upset everyone is and how grateful, to have the upper hand, if you're living after those bombs being dropped. And Oppenheimer is, I think, also trying to talk himself into it. He's trying to talk himself into, this was a good thing. This is what we were trying to do. Because if you intended to do this, maybe it's a little less to feel guilty about, as opposed to, this is not the byproduct of what I was trying to do. In the same way that Nobel, had his dynamite used in ways that he didn't want. Nobel built dynamite for good reasons, to build things, not to destroy lives. And I love that he was invoked at the beginning of the film. I plan to win a Nobel Prize. Nobel invented dynamite. I was like, yeah, well, here we are. And so that's a really great contrast and thing to note about Oppenheimer and Nobel, Alfred Nobel. Yeah. And so the way they're just using audio throughout this film, he leaves no stone unturned, man. He's using everything in his creative power to bring this story to life. And in that same vein, casting, like, another thing he just did not sleep on. Casting is so important, right? I saw Casey Affleck come on and I was like, oh, Pash. Okay, Pash is really important. This is a very important guy. And it was funny because walking out of the theater, I watched it with Scott at the IMAX, and he was like, man, I knew Rami Malek was going to be important, man. I saw him and I was like, oh, that's weird. He's just kind of a background character. And I was like, yeah, they're not going to cast him as an extra, right? And he's like, yeah. I was like, man, I knew this guy. No, they cast him for a reason. Just don't forget him. And then, of course, he comes in at the end as the dagger to Strauss's hopes, right? He's like, nope, this was all on Strauss. This is a vindictive thing that he had going on. And casting is really important because those are, small roles on the page, but really big roles in the story. And therefore, you need to cast big names because just seeing those actors in quick supporting roles tells us to remember them. It helps when they pop up or are referenced later to recall them in our mind. And it's crucial in such a complex drama to be able to instantly parse names and faces to help understand the stakes and payoffs. But it's also important to not cast someone too big for a supporting role, right? Now you want good actors as the Aide, right? The guy that's next to Robert Downey the entire film. You don't want to cast Casey Affleck in that role because now you're almost putting too much importance on that role. Whereas if you cast Alden Ehrenreich, like he's a really good actor, but not so good that he's a household name, therefore distracting from the purpose of his role. Because if you cast someone too big for that role, suddenly you're just waiting. When's your moment? You're going to have a moment. I'm waiting for what it is. And so casting is really delicate. It's a balance. And I think Nolan did a great job, as well as whoever the casting director, to find great supporting actors that are just really good actors. But I also loved that for me, there's certain actors that I saw coming in that I was like, oh, I'm so glad to see them in a good drama. Like Josh Peck. I think he's a really good dramatic actor. I don't like him in comedy. I think he just does not work for me in comedy, but my God, does he work for me in dramas. Similar to like Adam Sandler, right? You see him in a drama, you're like, man, that's going to be good. You see him in a comedy and you're like, I don't know if I want to watch that.
Great
point. Same thing with Olivia Thirlby. I think she's another one of these actors that have just been kind of underutilized throughout her career. And I'm not choosing those two names out of a bucket. They're both in The Whackness, which is one of my favorite little indie films that no one's watched. I just love that movie, and seeing them together on screen, even if not necessarily doing lines together, was really fun for me. But this movie is just laced with incredible talent that just aren't household names yet. I think Benny Safdie is probably on his way. This is the guy that plays Edward Teller, who the handshake guy. He's the one that, Emily Blunt's Kitty doesn't want to shake hands with. And he's got such a strong look. And it's crazy because he's also a writer director. Him and his brother did Uncut Gems.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Speaking of Adam Sandler.
Right. And it's just like crazy for me to see him getting to be in a Nolan film. That would be like, I don't know, Nolan getting to be in a Nolan film. It's like, wow, this guy is so wildly talented, but he has such a strong look. And I can see why you would want to use him. He's a good actor for sure, but his look just like pierces you. And seeing him on screen, like, does a lot. It brings a lot of life to a character that you need to bring a lot of life to, but also maybe not someone you want to just have overshadowing, the other actors on screen by sheer name alone. Yeah. And so, yeah, they did a great job. Gary Oldman stepping in as Truman is really wonderful, and just a strong, memorable moment, right? Because he says it straight. He's like, there's no blood on your hands. You're not going to be remembered for that. I'm going to be remembered for dropping those bombs because I made that decision. And he's absolutely right. Any blood you want to put on this, put on Truman. That's A-okay. Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of the things that I noticed. I think, there's probably 1,000 other things to point out, but what do you make of all that, man? Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of the music, so the guy who scored this film, he scored Tenet too. Which is really interesting, because I just think Nolan has had such success with what's his name?
Hans Zimmer, yeah.
Thank you.
That guy, that dude.
With that guy, with Hans Zimmer, that it's just interesting that he's, going back with somebody that he used in a film that was less received, I guess lower received. But oh my God, I mean, that just shows you, sometimes you need to make decisions when you're making stuff based on how you feel about that thing and how you feel one specific person is going to get it or do it right or or they're going to be easier to work with, or that you can go to them and ask them for something else, even though they've given you something already. Like, there could be a multitude of reasons why he didn't work with Zimmer. Maybe Zimmer was still working with Dune or whatever, but this guy, I think he took a long time to write the music, but he recorded the entire score in 5 days. The whole thing is there's like 2.5 hours worth of music, and he recorded it all in 5 days. And there's no drums in it. There might be percussive elements that happen throughout the film, and like clanks and bangs and stuff, but there's no drums in the whole thing. It's like very horn based and string based, right? So Nolan had told him that he wanted a lot of strings, and so we open with like strings. And like in that scene you were talking about where he has one pupil, Oppenheimer has one pupil, and that turns to more and turns to like a whole class. I read something where he said, I wanted to feel like it was multiplying, like this project was multiplying, or his interest was multiplying. So I have it starting with one violin, and then when we see 4 people, now there's 4 violins, and when we see a whole class, now there's a whole orchestra going on, so he would do things like that. And then there were, I know that in that same article that I read, and I send you a link in the show notes, it was in Variety, but he talks about how Nolan called him into an IMAX theater to watch what he was, putting together some of the visuals, and he like realized, oh my gosh, this is, I know what I have to do now. He would go back and do it. And then later on, while they're editing the film, Nolan would go to him and say, Göransson is his last name, I think, Göransson. Go to him and say, I need another 20 minutes of music. And then he would write a whole nother 20-minute thing of music. And then he would go to him later and say, okay, I need another 15-minute thing of music. And then he would write that. And just the back and forth, the ability to go back and forth with somebody who like knows your story and wants to tell it, and is okay with not having it be like, here it is, and then I'm gone, is probably a great way to work as a creator, I would imagine. But the score is just unbelievable. And it's not one of those scores where you could sit back and hum it, like a Hans Zimmer score or something, or where you hear it, that's Oppenheimer. It's so embedded in the visual of the film that it's hard to separate the two. And I don't think that anything else would have been right. I mean, I say that, of course, there's probably something else that could have been right. Who knows? But it just felt so ingrained in it and correct. It was just absolutely beautiful. Yeah.
Damn. That's fascinating. I mean, that's genius. The idea of starting small and then building up to a full orchestra, just to reinforce not just visually but thematically what's going on within the film. God, I mean, look, maybe that stuff doesn't make a hill of beans, but I think just having an approach that speaks to those things can make an impact. Whether or not it did in this case or in every case, I think just having that kind of mentality that says, what is this film about? What is this scene about? How can I layer that in my thinking about whatever I'm doing? Whether that's set design, wardrobe, music, cinematography, the lighting, right? What if they went from one light to multiple lights? I don't know. But thinking about those things is just an avenue to a creative process that gets you to a result. Sometimes whenever you're looking at a blank page as a writer, it's hard to know what's the right first word. And having an outline, playing some word association. For me lately, I've just been writing short films to help me get into a process, punch the keys, and, just to feel like this is going somewhere, I can get some momentum. And now here we are, like just having a starting point that points you in a direction can be super, super useful. Now, in this case, I think it did. I think it did pay off, but that's just an opinion. It's not supposed to be objective. I just, as a matter of creative process, really value and love that approach. Yeah. Very cool.
Amazing.
Nice. Last thoughts, man. I don't know. I got a lot still in the tank, I guess, but
no, I mean, I think you said it all, like, had some great points about little things that could have been maybe a little bit more clear, but like how great 99% of it was, and just, I don't have anything to add. I think I said everything I wanted to say. It's a masterpiece in my mind. I think it's just absolutely amazing. I want to watch it again. 3 hours long. Who cares? Just go watch it and enjoy it for the story that it is. And immerse yourself.
And I want to come back to that because the first thing you said was about the 3 hour runtime. And I completely agree. Like, yes, this could have been too long, but of course the proof of the pudding is in the eating, right? And so you watch the film and you're like, I get it. I get why this needed to be 3 hours long. I was on the edge walking in. I was like, is this 3 hours because it needs to be 3 hours, or is it that long just because he got lazy in editing? And there are so many films that I think are running into 3 hours now that they're just being lazy in editing, whether that's editing the script or editing the footage and tightening it down. I think there's this kind of buffet approach of more is better. And it's like, no, a better story is better. And if the story demands to be, 3 hours, then great, do that. But if it's not helping tell your story, then you need to trim it back. There's so many films that I've watched over the last 2-3 years. And as much as I appreciate filmmakers and distributors willing to go into this longer runtime, it just feels lazy. A lot of these longer stories are just being very, very lazy in their approach. And they don't know how to tell a tighter story. And it's one of those old adages of, I forget who said it, but I would have wrote you a shorter letter, but I didn't have the time. Right? It takes longer to write something concise than it does to just say a bunch of things all at once and go back and edit it, or to sit and think about what it is you really want to say and just write that. That's all very time consuming. Just spitting for, 3 hours doesn't take very much. You can let the scene run long. You don't have to think about what's important, what's not important. You just throw it all in there. And there's a lot of director's cuts that aren't very good, but that's not every director's cut. Some director's cut, I'm like, the studio did you a disservice. For me, Kingdom of Heaven, director's cut, far superior to the theatrical cut. They're just two different stories. And it's crazy because it's 20-30 minutes extra, but it changes the entire movie. And you're like, why are y'all doing this? Tell the right story. It doesn't matter the runtime. Just tell the right story. And if I were to edit, I couldn't edit this movie. I would have to rewrite this movie in order to make it shorter because everything is very puzzle pieced in, and it's telling a very specific story. And the only way to get around that is just to rethink the structure of the film. And I don't think you really want to do that too much on this, just because you could turn this into a Senate hearing, or you could turn this into a movie about Social Network, right? You could feel almost the skeleton of Social Network kind of looking in over Nolan's shoulder, like, what are you doing in there, Nolan? Because it feels very intercutty, right? With these important things that call back to the things that they're referencing. And that's all interplaying perfectly. And if you don't do it in this way, then you get into a very tedious thing, because this way you get to just go to the important parts and you get to fast forward through the past. You get to fast forward through the hearings. And if you don't do it this way, then you're having to set up the hearing. You're having to set up the stakes within the hearing itself, instead of using the hearings to set up the stakes of the scenes you're going to go and revisit. Like, that's all interlinked perfectly and well thought out in the structure. And if you wanted to do that other version, you just really need to do a mini series, like a limited HBO series kind of thing. And then that's a different result. And I'm sure that's still really compelling, but not going to fit into the format and kind of the push and the emotional weight that you feel in one sitting through this thing. Yeah. That's my final word.
Awesome. For now.
For now.
For now, yeah.
What are you going to recommend, man?
Oh, so I can't believe we haven't covered this or recommended it or whatever, but we're going in here and I'm like, what the hell do you recommend after Oppenheimer? I mean,
The Manhattan Project. No.
I was sitting here looking like, I just, I get the whole Barbenheimer, thing that's happening because it's just, you need a palate cleanse, but I went and reviewed everything. We haven't covered it. It hasn't been thrown out here in recommendations, but I'm going to recommend Chernobyl on HBO.
Did we not?
I know. Do a search on our sheet.
Holy crap.
Yeah. I win this week.
You do win this week.
I think we've talked about it on the podcast before. We brought it up, and it's just mind blowing, and it's very much in the vein of Oppenheimer. It's historic. The difference is it's not just about one person, and which I think is why it gets away with being more of a series than maybe a film, which Oppenheimer is a film because it's about one guy, right? I mean, like you mentioned, it maybe being could have maybe been a limited series, and it could have. It just, I think you would agree, wouldn't have the weight of being a film.
Yeah.
It needed to be a 3-hour film. So anyway, Chernobyl's absolutely fantastic. It's on it's on Max. Go stream it. It will blow your mind.
Yeah. Oh my God. And we should cue that up for a session. Yeah.
We should.
I'm going to recommend Trumbo. So one thing we didn't really touch on in this film, which is a major part of the film, is the Red Scare. I mean, there's this whole element in here about McCarthyism, punishing, Oppenheimer. And it's so funny, man. I think governments at large do this thing where once they get what they want out of you, you are either now still part of the team or they're going to destroy you. There's not a lot of middle ground. It's not like, there's that moment when Groves lets that guy walk out and Oppenheimer's like, you're just going to let him go. He's like, he hates me. He doesn't hate America. It's like, that's a really healthy perspective, General Groves. I don't know that you really have that point of view, though. I hope so, but that's not the way these things generally go down. It's, we're going to destroy the people that speak against us now. And Oppenheimer, I'm guessing, I forgot to kind of look into this, but it sounds like he started, championing restraint and the idea that maybe all these nuclear weapons weren't a good idea, and things of that nature, right? And McCarthyism, persecution is a great way to go about restraining views that don't help you and don't push your agenda, further. And the idea with America is not just being a nation of laws, but a nation of, free speech, is a great fantasy that we've been pushing and we really believe now. And I think this is storytelling 101. This is what makes storytelling so powerful, is we grew up on these ideas that free speech is everything. We have a right to these things. And that hasn't always been the case, like even in Oppenheimer's time, in Trumbo's time. So I'm recommending Trumbo because it's about a screenwriter who got blacklisted because of his views. And, he was a brilliant screenwriter. And because I forget all the details of it, but he got, listed as a communist, and maybe he was. To me, it doesn't really matter. But there was just so much fear and there was so much resentment towards Russia that anybody associated with those views were no longer tolerable. You were a persona non grata. You were no longer a human being. You were not a true American, blah, blah, blah. And just forgetting the whole idea of free speech is what we do here. It's all about tolerance and my fear. And I think Trumbo is such a good film to watch now, just to remind people that not everyone understands the way tolerance should be carried out, sometimes even least of all, the creative community. Because it wasn't just the government doing that to them, to Trumbo. It was artists. Artists were participating in this. And so right now, as you look at society as a whole, don't forget, just because you think you're on the right side doesn't mean you should be intolerant of people who think differently than you. And if you're not capable of sitting down and having lunch or dinner with someone with radically different views from yourself, you might be doing it wrong. So Trumbo, it's actually a really good film. It looks very dry, but it's actually incredible. It's Bryan Cranston. Do you need another reason? It's Bryan Cranston. Go watch it. I loved it. And I think it is a really nice avenue when you're thinking about all those things of what Oppenheimer was going through. Yeah. Stay tuned for next week. I forecast a really fun mission where we go into Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. We already recorded that. And so anything you hear this week in light of next week, or vice versa, I don't know. My linear thinking is destroyed after Oppenheimer. So.
Yeah, we're having a Tenet moment.
Yeah, that's right. We are. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget, subscribe, review, leave us notes, something you want us to talk about, things you find interesting. We like to hear about those things. Shout out to Uva for dropping some notes on the last few episodes, Apollo 13, and of course, Run Lola Run. Thanks, man, for contributing to the conversation. And if you want to comment on this episode in particular, feel free to do that at thepestlepodcast.com/Oppenheimer.
And our quote of the day today, this is another thing I loved about the film. We see all these like really famous scientists, and I'm like, oh my gosh, Niels Bohr. Yeah, this is amazing. Was just so fun. Anyway, so our quote of the day is from Niels Bohr. The opposite of a correct statement is a false statement, but the opposite of a profound truth may well be another profound truth. That is absolutely incredible. Did he really say that?
I know, right?
I mean, for like someone so analytical to be so proficient with words, so poetic is unbelievable, right? That's poetry right there. That's not just science. You know, that's political, that's humanitarian, it's just human. That's unbelievable. It is. I mean, I guess it does make sense when you study the universe and its inner workings, right? And you do experiments and you come to decisions, or you come to have hypotheses about the way the universe works. You find some work and some don't, and I think that throughout your life or throughout like history, very few people ask a question, ask a question and then experiment to find an answer and are honest with the result of their experiment, right? I mean, that is in itself is a definition of a scientist, right? And so if I'm sitting here and I'm saying, I think this, I just go on with my life thinking that. Right. But a scientist is going to go and say, I think this, and I'm going to try to make this happen, or I'm going to try to prove it. And then you find something else, or you find an opposite truth, right? Which also in itself is a profound truth. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's very scientific, but it's also very human. It's amazing.
Exactly. It's so human. And I think that kind of gets to what Oppenheimer was dealing with. On the one hand, you have a country hell-bent on evil purposes, trying to develop a weapon that could end everyone. And so he feels compelled to jump into that race. Like, we need to be that first so that we can prevent them. And then, of course, the other side of that is this is a thing that could end us. And just because we're the right ones to build it right now doesn't mean we're the right ones to hold it forever. And there's a lot to be weighed and considered. And it's not an easy answer. I've never pretended to know the exact answer. I've always been glad I'm not Harry Truman, because I don't know the right solution. My instinct is a demonstration's better than immediately killing 200,000 people. But at the same time, that wasn't on my shoulders. And so I respect that it's not an easy thing to weigh and to do. I'm certainly glad no one's used one since. And maybe in that way, Oppenheimer's wish did come true because we did get to see it used. No one has wanted to do it since. Like, as bad as things got between us and Russia, as us, between us and China, like, no one said it's time to drop one of these. Nah, maybe mutually assured destruction is a pretty good deterrence after all, hopefully. And hopefully it continues to be. Of course, a big fear is the longer we go since the last time it got used, the more tempting it becomes, the more you forget the devastating power of it. But hopefully that's the best case scenario for the loss of all that life is, the prevention of even more life in the future. I don't know, man.
That's a really good point there. Cause I was trying to think I remember, learning about the Cold War. Obviously that was, I was very young. But what was the reason why they weren't used again? Was it because of that? Was it because the demonstration was so vast and destructive that it not only caused, convinced Japan to surrender or just, whatever. It not only did it end World War II, but it ended the idea of ever using these again. Was it that big of a demonstration? And in that case, to your point, was it necessary? I mean, that's a heavy question. My God.
Yeah, exactly.
Wow.
Exactly.
To your point, I'm glad I wasn't Harry Truman.
Yeah.
My God.
I can't wait to see what Nolan does next. I appreciate how thoughtful he is. And if this is any indication of the trajectory that he's on, sign me up.
Yeah, I totally agree. Great quote, man. Wow. That's just unbelievable. Whew, gosh. Yeah. I mean, I could literally keep talking for another hour about this, but I think we got to call it at an hour now. Man, thank you so much for your insight, Wes. That was absolutely awesome.
Same to you, brother. You had a lot of really great stuff, not just in the film overall, but pointing out some of the stuff happening with the music. Fucking cool, man.
Yeah, man. Well, I hope that you guys enjoyed this and that you didn't listen before you watched. We warned you at the very beginning. But please, like Wes said, subscribe, review us, give us any kind of feedback that you might have. We'd love to hear your comments, and share us with a friend. It all helps. The podcast, we do this because we love it, but also we want to get out to people and we want to see what everybody thinks, and we want to dissect these things so that we can learn from it. And make something ourselves that has a little bit maybe of Oppenheimer in it, or a little bit of Mission Impossible in it, or a little bit of Cyrano in it. All of these things, they all culminate into these things that we make. And so that's why we do what we do. But make sure to follow us, subscribe, all that good stuff. Until next week, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies.
Yeah.